Republican North Texas Congressman Jake Ellzey. Thank you so much. We appreciate it as always.
Great to be with you,
So
Jack. I'm glad we're back at work.
the House has a new speaker, and as you just alluded to, and yesterday we saw Republicans come and unanimously support Mike Johnson of Louisiana. You were obviously among them. Why did you support him, and why do you think Republicans all came together on this?
I think the Republicans came together for many different reasons. One, he is a break from the leadership past. Another is he has a widespread, unanimous support amongst the conference members who believe what he says and they trust him. And I think that was a big part of the process for many of them. And of course, I support him because he's become a friend. He's a very smart guy when it comes to the Constitution. He's a conservative and he's just a good man. And you ask anybody in our conference, they will always talk about just how good a man he is. And regardless of where he votes on different subjects, he's a man you can trust. So he's got a great reputation amongst everybody. I will say that people were ready to get back to work, but that wasn't the driver on unanimity for Mike Johnson. They just like him and they trust him.
And let me ask you about this. Took 3 weeks to get to this point, as you know, since Speaker McCarthy was ousted. And last week, you joined other Republican members of Congress in not supporting Jim Jordan.
Yes.
What was your issue with Jim Jordan? Why did you not think he was the right person for the job?
Well, I appreciate the question, and this process as it played out. I sat down with Mr. Jordan in my office. He was kind enough to come to my office, and we talked. And I told him at that point that I would not be discussing this while he was a candidate for the speakership. And I had my reasons that I didn't feel like he was the right man for the job. I explained that to him and said I wouldn't talk about it anymore until he was either the speaker or out of the race. And now that he's out of the race, I feel free to talk about how I felt he was not quite up to the task based on several different factors, but also once there was a campaign that affected many of my friends who stood up and voted no to intimidate them, and some of them were even threatened. And how he handled that made it even worse. I will say that we're in Congress. I understand how this works. If you make some decisions and votes, people will talk about them from time to time, and you might receive some threats. But it's how he handled it that I didn't appreciate. And and by the way, when people discuss this, you're going to hear a lot of different rumors. The reality is, I made this decision on my own. I didn't tell anybody else about it. There was no coordinated effort by anybody on that first vote. Additionally, I would like to say this, that there was a widespread demand that nobody go to the floor unless you've got 217 in the room. And he changed his mind on that and went ahead and went to the floor without 217 in the room. And he did it 3 times over 8 days. That prolonged this process unnecessarily for 8 days.
And you're saying Mike Johnson didn't do that?
No, we voted in the room, and right after he was elected, of course, we went through 2 candidates that day. There were some folks missing that night, but there was no one who voiced another name in that roll call vote. There were several present and some missing. And by the time he went to the floor the next day, he had garnered enough support, as was evident when we went to the floor, that he played it right. Steve Scalise dropped out because he was told he didn't have the numbers, so he got out. Tom Emmer did the same thing. Mr. Jordan decided to do it somewhat differently, and that we lost a lot of time in that process.
And my last question on this topic, and that is, did you personally receive any threats about your vote?
I got some phone calls that weren't very nice, and some of them that were really not nice. But that's what you live with. You sign up for that up here. But some folks got legitimate death threats. Marionette Miller Meeks got a legitimate death threat, and that's just not how to handle it. And it wasn't in support of a candidate. It was, how dare you not vote for that candidate? But we get those kinds of calls all the time.
You mentioned at the top, it's good to be back at work. And right now, the government funding deadline is November 17th. So the funding is set to expire. And Speaker Johnson said that he'd like to continue current funding levels through either mid-January or mid-April, depending on what the Republican conference prefers, and then pass all 12 spending bills by August of next year. And so I'm wondering, is that something that you support?
And those are the spending bills for the follow-on year. So this gives us
Yeah.
a chance to get our spending bills out this year. And the reality is that we've lost 3 weeks. I think the folks who put the call on the chair, remember that was on October 4th before the world blew up. I think they caught the car and broke their nose on it, and so we lost a significant amount of time because of it. And now we've been backed into a corner because of the original vote to fund the government, which would pay our troops. And then they got what they wanted, and then they got a lot of things that they didn't want. So the reality is we're out of time. We are going to pass energy and water off the floor today, and of course, once it leaves our side of the House of the Capitol, then it goes over to the Senate, and then it has to be signed by the president. So we have to have a relief valve in place, and that's what he's doing, and everybody's on board with that. That's how he got unanimity.
As you know, President Biden has requested Congress send him a $106 billion package to support Israel, Ukraine, and border security, among other things. Where are you on this?
Well, it's where I am is let's support Israel as fast as we humanly can. That's been part of the pressure cooker of we need a speaker right now, and sure wish we had one when this started. That way we could have done this already. You're going to get a lot of different answers on that supplemental because the world is on fire, Jack. There's no discussing that. It is the truth. We have a border that is wide open. We have Russia doing things in Ukraine. A genocide in Ukraine. We have the Hamas conducting a genocide, another Holocaust in Israel, and Iran is right there in the middle of all of it. So the world is a threatening place right now. We have to get something accomplished soon, and we'll come to some kind of an agreement with the Senate sooner rather than later. We will be leaving today after the energy and water. We'll come back next week on Wednesday, and that's top of mind for everybody. So I think that in the intervening days, we'll come to an agreement with our Senate colleagues on the other side. Their priorities are a little bit different than ours are. Their priorities don't include the border as much as ours does. And we have to go after the border. We have to secure the border. So that's going to be a part of this process.
You visited Israel earlier this year, and you and I had a long discussion about that a couple months ago. And I'm wondering, what was your reaction when you first heard about the Hamas terror attacks and atrocities that they committed against innocent Israelis?
It's the Hamas Holocaust. People compared what Hamas did to ISIS. There's no comparison. They're far worse than ISIS, and the type of evil that must be required to do what they did to innocent civilians in Israel is absolutely unconscionable. Israel has my full support. Keep in mind that when you hear the rationale for anybody saying that anything Hamas did is okay, it's not. And there is no occupation of Gaza. Hamas has been running Gaza since 2005 when the Israelis pulled out. And in spite of that, the Israelis still provided 22% of their electricity for the people who aimed to kill them. So it really wasn't a question of if, but when. But the manner in which this was done, I think, showed their true evil. And it's now time that the world unite and say we have to do away with Hamas. Then we have to turn our eyes to Hezbollah. The idea of 4 nations right now in the world, very much like 1938, all have genocidal tendencies. Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea. If you're not strong in confronting them, they get to do what they want. And we've seen that. We have to put a stop to it. And we have to be united as free Western countries who believe in good and evil, as I do, and that evil does exist. And it showed its face on October 7th. And it's time to wipe Hamas from the face of the earth.
And so what should the U.S. be doing to help Israel?
Anything that Israel needs, we get it to them.
Plain and simple.
Yes, sir.
And you were among those in the House who voted in favor of a resolution to support Israel. There were 10 people who did not, who voted against it, and 6 others who voted present. What's your thought about that?
I don't know how you can vote either present or no on that resolution. I really don't. This is pure good versus evil. Of course, we know that the squad is going to vote either no or present. I was disappointed to see 3 Texans either vote no or present. I don't understand that thought process, but nevertheless, you're always going to get some folks who don't do the right thing as a part of this process. But 410 yeses out of 427 or so sitting Congress members. That is widespread condemnation and a step in the right direction. So I'm very proud that 410 stood up on a bipartisan basis and said, we have to stop this.
You met with authorities in Israel during your trip there, and I'm wondering, was this scenario ever even considered or discussed?
They never discussed it with us, but as you well know, that on the border with Lebanon and in Gaza as well, the tunnels are vast and widespread, and they're deep and they're complex, and they've spent 15 to 20 years building these tunnels with which they use to hide the hostages and conduct their terror campaign. So I think they knew something was afoot, but I don't know, not being on the intel committee, what intel existed on our side or the Israeli side about a pending attack in this manner that caught everybody off guard. And of course, I think when they stumbled upon that concert with, I think, 4,000 attendees when they launched their attack, that unfortunately gave them a large ability to kill a lot of people. And but when I was there, we looked at Gaza. We saw that we went to Sderot and went to the town right next to Gaza, and those people live in fear constantly. That has played out in a way that none of us expected, but I think it's an eye-opener for the rest of the world to go, even in 2023, you want to see the face of evil? It showed itself, and it must be wiped off the earth.
And I wanted to ask you about Ukraine. President Biden wants more support for Ukraine's war or their battle defending itself against Russia's attacks. And I know you support Ukraine. You were there earlier this year. And why are Republicans the ones who are questioning and in some cases opposing more support for Ukraine?
You'd have to ask them, but the reality is that this is part of a much bigger network of evil that exists in the world, much like it did in 1938. People need to understand that this isn't an isolated event, and it's not a war, it's an extermination. As I said, all four of the regimes are in favor of exterminating another race. The Chinese want to exterminate the Uyghurs. The Russians want to exterminate the Ukrainians. The Iranians want to wipe out the Jews from the face of the earth. And the North Koreans want to just kill just about everybody. So it's all linked. And we have also learned that the Iranians are involved in Ukraine with their drone warfare. And they're on the ground. They are boots on the ground there. These regimes are not separate. These are not isolated incidents. It is all united. And if we can distract our attention from things like this, then who knows what can happen. So Putin is an evil man. He's a dictator who is intent on exterminating the Ukrainians, just as Stalin tried to by killing 8 million of them in the 30s. And again, there is an anti-Semitic link in a lot of these things that people must understand as well.
What do you make of the rising anti-Semitism on display in this country?
You're seeing it at what used to be considered our finest institutions of learning. And it shows that over the course of a couple of generations, that has infiltrated and sickened the students who go there in a way that doesn't make any logical sense. And the Marxist ideologies that have existed in those institutions of higher learning are now rearing their ugly heads, and they can't be denied. And anti-Semitism is on the rise around the world, and it must be fought at every corner, ideologically, and in the case of Hamas and Gaza, militarily.
And my last question to you regarding the border. There have been reports that 169 people on the terror watch list were detained or apprehended at the southern border. How concerned are you about that, and what can be done in your estimation?
Texans have been beating the drum since this crisis really got started about the same time as Joe Biden took office and said, come on over. And the bad guys, the evil ones, know how to get into our country. And that is a threat in wait for us here. And I don't understand, with all the things that are going on with the border, all controlled by the cartels. Authorization to use military force against the cartels should be passed soonest. The fentanyl issue, killing 120,000 Americans every year in our bedrooms and our backyards, plus those who are killed by drug overdoses, plus the security threat. How can anybody stand up and say, no, we don't need to do anything on the border? I don't understand. Again, it defies all logic, just as it does with the moral equivalency between Hamas and Israel. It doesn't make any sense to me. But if you are a person who loves life, and you see what these cartels are doing to men and women, boys and girls, bringing them through the border for the purposes of human trafficking for the sex trade, on a moral basis alone, whether you have faith in any religion or not, it is absolutely inhumane, and we have to put a stop to it.
Republican North Texas Congressman Jake Ellzey, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Great to see you, Jack.